make sure that you are, starting that momentum early enough where you're not exhausted by the time you get to that launch date.
Totally. That probably sounds exhausting to some people, like, oh my gosh, like so much planning ahead. But I can promise you, like, it will take years off of your life if you don't.
I can vouch for that. The number of things that I've pushed to the last minute, because I am such a great procrastinator. And every time I do it, I'm like, why did I do this to myself? Like, I'm always so mad at myself. And that's just a terrible feeling. I mean, there's, you get that little bit of a high when you have the relief, and then you're like, well, actually, crap, this wasn't done as well as I could have done it, and my follow through is now more of lingering things to fix than it is like, this is a well-oiled machine.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast, brought to you by Indiepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. My name is Corrin. With me is Jack. We are the hosts of this podcast. And
we're back.
And we're back from the holidays. So glad to have you here with us. Jack, did you get into a food coma? Did you chill at home? What was your jam this year?
A little bit of food coma does a body well at Thanksgiving. So I did experience a little bit of a food coma on a Thanksgiving that was like 60 degrees or something. I think it was like beautiful weather. Got to take some walks. Yeah, it was really nice. How about you?
Yeah. I worked.
Nice.
I worked on my stuff though. I got my new membership site launched, which was something that I know I've talked about on this podcast that I've just been procrastinating. So I got that done and spent time with my cat. Great day overall.
Sounds like stuff to be thankful for. Yeah.
Yeah, super thankful. So now we're moving into the end of this year. Can't believe it's December. And, we got some frigid temperatures and snow in Tennessee, and it reminded me how much I have to get done before 2020 is over. And I think there's a lot of people looking forward to 2020 being over.
Yeah.
So before we look forward, we're going to look back, and we're going to look back at some nice things. And lessons learned is something that is just so important, whether they're good ones, bad ones, and learning from others can be super helpful. So we're going to go down kind of a list of cool things about album launches, because it's something that a lot of indies do, and it's things that happen at IndieX. And I think, Jack, you should kick this off, because I know you have a lot to say about album launches.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this one. I thought that this would be a fun episode for us to kind of unpack like 5 different kind of key things that we've picked up, takeaways that indies can use and learn from some of the launches that we've run at IndieX, because we've run album launches and product launches for artists that are just getting started and building a fan base for the first time, to YouTubers that are crushing it, and artists that are, multiple Grammy nominated and award winning and have sold hundreds of thousands of records over the course of their careers. So we've seen a lot of different types of launches, especially this year. It's been really, really varied, which has been a lot of fun. And there are some kind of key takeaways that I thought would be fun for us to kind of explore and unpack, some lessons learned and some things for indies to be aware of as they get into the process of launching their own music, and, just some things to be aware of and to make sure that you've got on lock. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and there's a terminology spin that you wouldn't necessarily expect here, right? Because the industry is constantly talking about launching an album. That is obviously something that everyone knows, but at Indiepreneur, it means something a little different for us. And that is because of the campaigns that we've run. So if you're new to us or new to the concept of the album launch from an Indiepreneur expectation, it might look a little different. We are not talking about putting songs up and then talking about it on Instagram and calling it a day. These are really detailed campaigns, and That's why I think there's so much for, especially Jack to talk about here, because he's done several of these complicated stack campaigns, and really they're not just intending to get the album exposure, right? This is a collection of emails and customers and advertising, and there's a whole lot of effort that goes into it. So if you've not yet done an album launch in that way, that's what we think about when we're thinking about launching an album. And so I think there's a whole lot to dig into on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that's a really, really great jumping off point for one of these kind of takeaways that I wanted to talk about. So if you're down, let's get into it.
Yeah, let's go. What do you want to start with?
Yeah, well, so you mentioned how a lot of the album launches and campaigns that we see run, especially at agency, at IndieX, are, they're not just putting your music up and talking about it and hoping to generate as much quote unquote buzz as possible, that they're really multi-layered kinds of campaigns that focus on a number of different areas. And so kind of key takeaway number one when it comes to album launches or launches of any kind really is to think about your audience critically. And I think I was going to kind of peg this one as last, but since you touched on it, I figured we'd kick it off with this.
My bad.
No, it's a good one to start with because I think it's really important. As we've worked with artists of all different shapes and sizes and styles, I think there's kind of been a realization that's happened to me, especially over probably I want to say most of this year, but maybe even into the tail end of 2019 as well, that a lot of the music industry at large, especially like some labels, some managers, I'm not trying to, paint with broad strokes here, but a lot of experiences that I've had have been album launches that I often see kind of paint fans with broad strokes and just say like, a fan is a fan and we want fans to hear this. And that's a really interesting limitation to put on yourself.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
I'm being kind. That's a massive limitation to put on yourself. So I think a takeaway here is, and we do this in all of the album launches that we run, is we look at a fan base critically and we look to see, from a level perspective, where do your fans sit? How many fans are just kind of hanging out in like awareness of you and engagement of you? How many customers do you actually have? How many subscribers do you actually have? How many people have bought from you more than once? This is going into the concepts that we talk about often on the podcast, the buddy system. But we look at all those areas and we don't just lump everyone in an audience into fans and we want fans to hear it. We structure our campaigns to, focus in on different segments of a fan base, different levels of intimacy with a fan base, and build assets for a launch around those. And that's really, really important. I think if we're thinking about this like an umbrella, like this is like the very top of the umbrella of things that you should be paying attention to when running a launch. Right.
Yeah. And I mean, I know IndieX has worked with like artists that literally have Grammys and have sold tons and tons of albums. And so it's interesting that there's still something to learn after that, right? And this isn't us like talking shit about the industry. Like, no, that's not really what we're trying to do here. I think it's just important. It's like that thing applies to a brand new person as much as it applies to someone who has sold hundreds of thousands of albums. And I think that that's something that can really be gleaned from this, is that a lot of these strategies, when you apply them at scale, they may look different, but the foundation is the same, and it comes back to what we're always talking about, which is customer or fan segmentation, right? And I think that's one thing that's lost in a lot of album launches that I see at all levels, where it's like, okay, you got a billboard up of this album, or maybe even just a single that's out, and you just want people to go flock to it. And it just seems very short-sighted. So it's definitely not something that only applies to artists of certain levels, this is something that is far reaching no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's interesting. Like, for artists that are, you know, have larger fan bases and maybe come from, like a label background or something like that. What's interesting is like, so often the focus with launches traditionally is so heavily focused on top of funnel. And so like bottom of funnel and middle of funnel is largely ignored. So like looking at, you know, generating subscribers, looking at generating customers, a lot of that tends to just kind of, like, yeah, hopefully they buy some records. And like, that's kind of where it stops. Where so much of the push is focused on PR, is focused on, you know, top of funnel traffic, is focused on publicity and, you know, appearances and things like that. Whereas, you know, for artists that are building up a fan base for the first time, maybe it's a different challenge because you really need that top of funnel and you need that initial awareness, audience building happening. But the budget is constrained that like, yeah, we also have to pull out some revenue wins. So it's funny that like,
Right.
It's funny that with like larger artists, the opportunity to monetize is usually stronger, but often ignored.
Right.
And for smaller artists, the ability to monetize is often a little more constrained, but the focus is often needed to be there because budget is so small.
Yeah, definitely. It's if you have money to burn, right? You don't really, it's just going up in flames. And it's a problem of having too much money. You know, we never thought that could ever be a problem, but it can, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
So, but I think one thing that does allow is kind of a creative mandate, right? Like if you don't have a ton of budget to launch an album, you're going to have to get creative and choose what you're going to spend your money on and what you're going to do organically and where to prioritize those dollars, right? And so that can be heavily dependent on what your audience looks like. If you're brand new, that's going to, you know, you're going to have to do a lot more at top of funnel. But if you are someone who has even a small fan base that's established and been there for a couple of years, right? Even if it's not huge, you're still going to want to put some effort and investment into that portion of your audience. So, you know, I think that's where you really want to evaluate all these different things and be aware that you need to, because you still need to make money at the end of the day, right? If you want to keep doing music, that's the goal. So knowing where to prioritize dollars, you know, if you don't have a ton of money and you have to get more creative, that actually might be better because it's probably something you should have been doing anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I was having a conversation with one of our clients' managers, probably back in like the summertime. And he made a really, really good point that was like, you know, with every project that gets launched or every album or whatever it might be, like the focus shouldn't just be on making that project as successful as it can be in like one stunt. It should it should also be geared towards what is this going to do for me in the long term? How is this going to benefit me for the next time I do a launch? And I know we've talked about this on other episodes, especially talking to Jesse and Ed, Basic Printer and the 502s, about their most recent launches compared to their previous launches. They're a really good example of this. Like they used, you know, a first launch as the kind of like infrastructure building and the audience building and subscriber and customer creation. For what that did for them was massive for the next project that got launched.
Absolutely.
And that's so much more beneficial than if they just were like, oh yeah, like I launched my first record and just spent like a ton of money on PR or a ton of money on Facebook, you know, Facebook ads, top of funnel music video campaigns or something. And that was all I focused on. Instead, like they really focused on movement across the whole ecosystem. And because of that, they reaped the rewards. So it is cool to kind of hear that feedback from people that we're working with on our clients' teams as well, to like see that vision. I think that that's an amazing thing. And that's how you think about your fan base from like a critical and long-term perspective.
Right. And this is another reason why like contact lists that have good tracking on them is important, right? Because it's a whole different kind of conversation And, you know, I know we talk about it a lot and people are like, yeah, I get it. You know, I shove my products in there. But it's really important when you're launching an album to know how familiar they are with you, how much they've already spent with you, what is a big ask for them and what is something that isn't, you know? So it's not just understanding that there are tiers to your fans. It's also understanding how to know what those tiers are, you know, and who belongs in what tier. And it's shocking how many people just kind of wisps over that as if it's not important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a critical part of any project building or any project initiation is like you should evaluate where you're at before you set goals and expectations. Otherwise, you're kind of shooting blind.
Yeah, agree.
But you raise a good point about tiers of fans and who's hanging out in them, and I think this is a perfect kind of transition to the next point and kind of the next takeaway, and that's like planning your offers, having tiers of offers and knowing who you're going to make those offers to. I can't tell you how many times when we have consultations with people about launching a record or something like that, you know, creating the body of work has been so important and branding the body of work has been so important. But then when it comes down to like, okay, well, what's the offer going to be? Like question marks just pop up in front of everybody's face. That's something that we see really, really regularly. It's like, oh, well, like I was just going to put it up on my store for $10. No, do not blow this opportunity to, you know, use your launch period as kind of a cultural moment to make a statement with the offers that you're making, to make different offers to different kinds of people. Here's an example. Here's an example from a launch that we ran back in the summertime. It was, the simplest offer tweak that you could possibly imagine. We had a first demo, which is a meeting that happens at the end of the week with our clients. We had a first demo with the team, and we were getting ready to push this record out and to do a heavy amount of front-end promotion to this artist's big warm audience, like very, very big, to the tune of like millions of people. And it was a matter of coming up with, okay, well, like what is your offer? Oh, well, like we're just going to put the record up in the store. Well, the simple tweak was like, well, are you going to autograph the record? Oh, we weren't really planning on it, but we could. And it was like, okay, well, let's charge, instead of having just standalone CDs in your store, let's, put together a product and it's an autographed record, limit it to, a scarce number and autograph it and put it up in the store for $25 instead of $10. And what happens when you do that? Well, you sell out of those records in 24 hours, which is what happened, happened to this artist. So simply reallocating, a small number of what you were already planning to sell, packaging it up in a different way, changing the copy, changing the messaging, really honing in on the sales offer. And that increased the bottom line of that launch by a lot.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I've actually done that recently on my vinyl pre-order. And there's going to be a limited edition of that vinyl, but there's a standard edition and a limited edition. And the way that I am, it's a pre-order, but they're on their way. This isn't a crowdfunding pre-order. They're already ordered. It's just vinyl takes forever. Especially now, it's taking a long time. If you want to know more about that, you can look online about vinyl lacquer and what's been going on with a shortage there. COVID has finally caught up with the vinyl market. Yeah. So hopefully we'll be digging out of that soon. But vinyl is definitely something that is becoming more expensive and more scarce. So, but these pre-orders, essentially, there's a limited edition and a standard edition. And if they pre-order it versus ordering after, I personalize them. And it's crazy how much that has impacted people's willingness to pre-order it. And limited edition, very similar. I went a little overboard with my greatest hits limited edition, which, Jack, I know you saw that packaging.
Oh yes.
It was a little overboard, and it probably didn't need to be that to have the same impact, but I just really wanted to. But you know, for my limited edition vinyl, it's coming, you know, obviously it's 12 by 12, and all I'm doing is like I'm printing out 12 by 12, basically artwork, and putting that in there. And there's only going to be 50 of those, or maybe I did 100. It might be 100 of those. But that's it. I'm just inserting that in there, putting in a little, you know, authentication card, right, with a number on it, of number of 100 or whatever it is. And I've only sold like 3 of the standard limited editions, and everybody else has purchased. The standard has sold like a couple, and limited edition is almost sold out already. So it does go to show that you can make these adaptations to the packaging, and if you word it right and make a scarce number, like it's just shocking what that can do to motivate somebody to grab it. Yeah, for sure. And I think another takeaway kind of related to this one is learn from how those offers sell. You know, like you mentioned that like the autographed vinyl is just flying off the shelves. Well, personalized. It's personal. Personalized. Flying off the shelves. Well, you can learn from that and kind of use that to make pivots as you need to, you know, and kind of reallocate your inventory appropriately. Right. We've done this kind of throughout time. You know, with merch that either doesn't sell, like repackage it into a bundle which has something autographed or personalized in it, and all of a sudden, you know, you've got a more sexy offer. Right. I think like being able to learn from how your audience, how your market responds to what your offer is really, really important. Use those takeaways. Don't ignore them, you know? Yeah. 'Cause oftentimes then you're just, you know, you sell out of the thing that really took, and it's like, okay, well, like now I need to sell the things that didn't really sell all that well. Right. Well, what kind of inspo can you pull from what did work, and then use that to rework what isn't working, you know? Right. Well, yeah. And so you should be doing this evaluation on your products, like the types of products you should be offering, right? If something sells quickly, like make maybe not identical more, but make more of that type of product. If you are, you know, talking about like, hey, if I personalize this, or if I have a limited edition of this, or if I autograph this, right? Any kind of special treatments that you're putting on your products, take note of those. And then also take note of, you know, even something as easy as sizes, right? Like you can save when you're doing an album launch, and say you're doing it with a bundle, and you're like, hey, here's this album and it comes with this bundle of this t-shirt and this and this and this. You know, if you start to see a skew of sizes in one direction or the other, or if you're aware of those trends, right? Just paying attention to these things means that your album launch can be more profitable, right? Here's the merch nerd coming in, but like then you know that the money that you're spending is probably very similar to what you will actually sell, instead of just ordering a standard range and selling out. Like I have a lot of fans who need extended sizes. And so for Black Friday, I didn't have extended sizes of the merchandise I still had in stock. And I was fortunately tracking sizes in my email provider. So I knew what the T sizes were of a lot of my audience. And I did a pay what you want for these shirts because I only had this limited range of sizes. So to me, it wasn't beneficial to leave them in the store and piss off all my fans because I didn't have, you know, these basically from an XL and up. I didn't have any in those, you know? So instead of making them mad that I'm not carrying their size, I instead did a pay what you want to, you know, shove these smaller sizes out the door. And now I have even more data about what t-shirt sizes I should be ordering next time. So those are the kinds of things you can glean from any of your previous sales, or, you know, any promotions that you'd run before. Is, you know, take note of what kind of variants people are buying, whether that's sizes or whether that's, you know, an exclusive kind of short run. You know, what are the variables that cause people to buy faster and buy more and be willing to pay more? You know, learning that history, I think, is really essential to making any kind of launch, whether it's an album or a product launch, successful. Yeah, totally. And this flows perfectly into two other
Man, two other takeaways that I think are amazingly important. And the first one is have your fulfillment on lock. Like make sure that your
Thanks for
fulfillment
the plug, buddy.
Yes. Make sure that you're working with Full Stack Merch, or make sure that your team is working as hard as Full Stack Merch does. Just a shameless little plug. Just a shameless little plug there. But no, seriously, make sure your fulfillment is ready to go, because running out of product while you're in the middle of trying to sell it can cause massive bottlenecks, having to turn ad campaigns on and off.
Or just piss people off.
Certainly, yeah, piss off your fans.
Definitely seen that, where people are like, oh yeah, I've got more coming in. And then it's like weeks later and you're like, this dude ordered 4 weeks ago. Like, oh my gosh, yeah. You're lucky you're not getting a charge back right now,
Yeah, for sure. So like know what your, or at least have a good estimate of what your inflow is going to be like as far as orders, and have a sense of when you're going to be able to restock inventory and how fast. Right. I've seen that turn into nightmare scenarios where you're just stuck and not able to do anything. And that can cripple a campaign that was doing well. If especially like it's been especially true this year in 2020 with like, fulfillment delay times from manufacturers being so long. I've seen that cause so many issues with anything from shirts to CDs, and you mentioned vinyl, Corrin, which is happening now. So just making sure that your fulfillment necessities are, taken care of at the outset, and that how you're going to stay in front of things when you need to, I think is, I can't stress that one enough.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, first off, projecting merch is something that really needs to happen if you're doing any kind of promo where you could possibly sell more than you have in stock. You just need to basically look at, okay, what is the average rate I'm selling per day? Like take the last, or something that I've done before, right? If you're launching a new album, you're not going to have a ton of data on that. But if this is your second album, take a look at the first one, right? And be like, okay, how many did I sell and how many did I have on my mailing list then? All right, how many am I going to sell this time based on the mailing list if it were a relative relationship, 1-to-1, and kind of guesstimate how many you're going to sell. If you're in the process of selling something, know what your production turnaround time is and account for any possible delays, and project inventory based on, okay, I'm selling, 6 of these albums a day. So therefore, and I need 4 weeks, right, to stock in. So I know that if I keep selling at this same rate every day, I'm going to be able to project that this is the day I will be out. Therefore, I need to order 3 weeks before that, or whatever it is, So, paying attention to that stuff, it can be really distracting when you're selling and something is going well, especially if you just launched something and you've poured months into this, and it's doing well. But if you run out, that's always a bummer for the person who did order it. Especially, it's difficult to be like, yeah, I just launched this album and I'm already sold out, and now you have to wait for weeks. I
think you just gave everybody a fulfillment gold nugget there. Like that is like a process just laid out step by step by step. So good.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's what we do here for our clients. And I think it can be difficult to stay on top of that. But if you just kind of put it in a spreadsheet, in a Google sheet, it's actually a lot easier than it sounds. So yeah, I mean, you definitely don't want to run out. And so let's say you did run out. Let's say you don't have any data to work with and your launch was wildly successful, which is what we always hope for. And you sold out way faster than you expected and you couldn't plan for it. At that point, it becomes really important to communicate what's happening to these people, right? Set up some kind of automation. As soon as you realize that you're out, set up an automation on your mailing list or your store or wherever it is that you're tracking your customers that say, look, these were so popular, but you are at the front of the line. They've been reordered, and just make sure that they know, right? Don't try to be hiding from it. I think I know a lot of artists that are like, well, I'll let them know when it sends. And then it's 10, 14, 20 days later. And people, that's one way to really punish someone for supporting you, you know?
I don't want to put any specific artist on blast. But I ordered a vinyl from an artist I might have even talked about this on the podcast before. I ordered a vinyl from an artist that I like as a gift for my girlfriend last October, and the release was happening in January.
Gotcha.
I did not get that record until 3 weeks ago.
Oh my gosh.
No communication, literally zero communication from that time. I didn't do a chargeback because by the time that I thought about it again,
wasn't even eligible.
I was well out of the window of a chargeback, but
right.
absolute insanity. And then we got the record and it wasn't even correct. Like it had, it was very strange. It was supposed to be signed a certain way and it wasn't. And just like talk about a massive, and I'm not, not a huge fan or anything, but I was looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, you spent the money and you waited a year. So
yeah. So have your fulfillment really doing the work ahead of time. I think that's so important.
Again, if you end up in a stuck place, because that does happen, right? We all make mistakes. And, like I said, if you have a wildly successful launch that you weren't expecting, at least have kind of that safety net in there where it's like, okay, I'm just going to be communicative and let people know. And if anything, it lets them know that they, contributed to something exciting. I mean, don't do that like falsely just to make people think you're super popular or anything. But, as long as you communicate with people, generally they're going to be really understanding. Just don't let that go uncommunicated.
Totally, yeah. And I mean, it can even be as simple as like putting on your sales page, like orders ship after this date if you know you're doing a restock, so that when new orders come in, at least there's an expectation set of when this is going to be happening.
That's what I do instead of like, people do Kickstarters and crowdfunding and like, I don't do it that way. I just put it up in my store and essentially let people know that that's what it is. And be like, look, you can pre-order this and you can pre-order it in this version or in the bundle or however you want. And it'll be done on this day and I'll send it to you, And, people are like, well, people know the name of Kickstarter. It's like, if they want to support you, there's nowhere that they'd rather do that than your own site, Yeah, so
totally.
I do that constantly with my products. And as long as it's very clear in the description, like this is not something that's going to ship out today. This is something that launches or releases on this date. As long as you communicate that, just always keep people in the loop. Once they give you money, you owe them,
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of money,
we can talk about money. I like talking about money.
Speaking of money and spreadsheets, here's a piece that I have trouble fathoming sometimes how launches even get started without knowing this, but I've certainly run into it enough times this year that it's worth a warning, is know your numbers, meaning like know the margins on the products that you're selling. Because if you don't and you're advertising, you could lose your butt really fast. And I've seen that come close to happening.
Dude.
So
a rookie
knowing
mistake,
your numbers,
a rookie mistake I've seen done somewhat recently was someone was selling these bundles, and essentially they were like, here's the album, and you're like, do you want to add this thing? And they had set their shipping. This was going internationally, right? So they had set their shipping for international. The problem is that they set their shipping to international for the album and didn't think about all of these other items. So when people were checking out for the album plus the t-shirt, if you send something internationally as a package and it's over half a pound, you pay twice as much. It's like $14 to send from the US to the UK if it's 8 ounces or less. And if it's 9 ounces and above, you're going to pay $24. So that, that artist was panicking, and I was like, all right, well, let's take a look at things. And fortunately, we made the fix as quick as it was realized. And I was actually the one who noticed it. And I was like, yo, But once we looked at the margins on the product, it was like, okay, we can calm down. Like this, we fixed it, but also we didn't lose money. And so it can basically make your decision process more informed. And when things do happen and it's fast and it requires a quick reaction from you, it keeps you from maybe feeling panicked and not making the best decision from there on out.
Yeah, totally. And that's a really interesting little use case about why you should know your numbers, because that kind of worked in the favor of the artists a little bit. Like they knew their numbers on the product and knew, okay, like I don't have to panic all that much.
Right.
Like I had cushion essentially. Like I didn't lose everything from a mistake.
Right.
So that's hopefully a little inspiring. But yeah, and I mean, it even plays into like, the point of creating offers is like, if you know your margins on specific products, then you might know, for a CD, for example, if you're underpricing it and need to add value because it's costing you more money to sell it than you thought, then you know how to crunch those numbers, how to add margin based on the things that you do, whether that's personalizing, autographing, bundling, whatever you do to add value to an offer. You have to know your numbers to be able to do that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. It's funny too, when you just sometimes, okay, so we've talked about you need to plan ahead for sales promos and blah, blah, blah. But I didn't do that.
Blah, blah, blah.
Blah, blah, but I didn't do it. Like, I am really good at telling people what to do in their music careers and then completely neglecting my own. And fortunately, it always works out. But, sometimes I do really great planning, and sometimes I am working on entrepreneur stuff and I'm working on full stack merch client stuff. And by the time I get to mine, it is a last minute kind of thing. Or there will be, something in the world that happens and you're like, I want to do something for that. Well, recording a song for that event or, doing something like that is probably not feasible to pull a quick trigger on. But if you know your margins, you can definitely do something where you can pull a quick trigger. And that's what happened on my Black Friday sale is, we launched, I don't know if you've been around, but you probably saw everything that was going on for Entrepreneurs Black Friday and Cyber Week. And we even did something 7 days prior to Black Friday that was completely different. So it was a mega launch. The team all came together, obviously, but I was, pretty swamped in the tasks that were assigned to me. And so my Black Friday got completely kind of derailed as far as I knew what I was going to do probably, but I didn't get it done. And so I ended up launching it on Black Friday, and I could do that because I knew my numbers, so I could be like, okay, what do I have? Yeah. What do I have in stock? What are my margins on those? What are the things I could afford to do, clearance style prices on, like that low 20% margin that we've talked about? What are the things I could afford to do that with? What could I charge? And when you know those numbers, like coming up with those things, even if you like kind of fudged setting it up as early as you should, which come on, I mean, we all do that. If you don't have IndieX doing it for you, we all do that. Yeah. So knowing those numbers can really help you when you decide to make a quick pivot or when you want to, put up a promotion real quick. Just knowing those numbers and knowing what kind of bundles would make sense and still be profitable for you is, that's super important.
Yeah. And I think like something I want to stress here is like someone's not going to do that for you, like you might have a fulfillment team that like has your numbers, but they're not going to ask for them. Like they're not going to be asking you every promo that you run. Like, oh, are you thinking about your numbers? Like in a lot of cases, you as the artist have to, to some extent be the ringleader and make sure that, you're taking care of yourself.
Right.
That's something that I want to stress because in the midst of so many other things, I promise you, like the other pieces of your team are not always going to ask that question to you.
Right.
I've certainly seen that. I've been on both sides of that, having to be the one to ask and then having to be the one to remind someone after I wasn't told, like,
Right.
hey, by the way, like, are you making money off of this? It's not a fun spot to be in.
Totally. Yeah, it's funny because Full Stack Merch does do that for some of ours. We do know a lot of what their margins are, what they have high inventory in, or what's in backstock that hasn't been moving, right? And so we do weigh in on some of those things. We had an Australian artist who actually wasn't moving a whole lot in the US, just wasn't marketing much in the US. And he hit me up, I think it was like maybe 24 hours prior to Black Friday, and was like, so I'm thinking I just need to clear out this US stock. And I was like, yeah, we'll do a free plus shipping and handling funnel to your US customers. And because he knew his margins and I knew, kind of what the sales rate was on each of these albums for the upsells, it was a really quick process, But yeah, a lot of people aren't going to do that for you, and he still needed to know what his kind of break even was, what he purchased those CDs for, if the backstock had kind of depreciated enough for it to be worth it for him. And so those are definitely things that you need to take responsibility for, whether you have a team or not. Because the chances are, unless you are like a major artist where you don't even touch your inventory, unless you're that kind of artist, nobody's going to do that for you. You're still going to have to do it.
Totally. And I would say, even if you are a major artist, like, having your pulse on it for instances where your team slips up is helpful. Because I've seen slip ups. They're not fun.
Yeah. I mean, I think, for some artists that's a management thing, but totally. Taylor Swift, for example, is really in tune with her business. And I know that, through the grapevine, she's a business shark and she does know that stuff. So, I mean, I would even argue that the best major artists have, some kind of purview that includes that stuff. So, if you're, not as big as Taylor Swift, which would be all of us, then, if she can do it, we all can do it.
Yeah, if it's good enough for Taylor Swift, it's good enough for me.
Exactly. Yeah. So yes, knowing those numbers, super important, whether you're talking about for promos, for a launch. I think one thing is looking back, right? And that's where a lot of sales promos come in. But with a launch, you're probably dealing with a whole bunch of new things. So as you're ideating, you're looking at what products you want to sell, right? In an optimal world, what would you sell and for how much and what would your margins be? Because sometimes it can be really easy to get ahead of yourself and develop out all these products that in reality, like, if you were to make an acceptable margin, which I mean, hopefully would be like 60% margin full price. If you're like, oh, I want this, and this, and this, you're either not going to get that 60% because you realize later, like, oh, sourcing this and making this is going to be way more expensive than I guessed. Or you're going to end up basically charging people a gazillion dollars, that they're not going to pay, which means you're not going to sell, which means, that it's not successful. So it's definitely something where you need to know those numbers and really know them. Like, don't be like, yeah, no, I looked online. I can get this type of t-shirt for, if it's a fancy one, maybe it's like $11 per. And it's like, okay, but then there's the treatment, the shipping, all of these things incorporated into it. So you really got to take a look at all that stuff and get ahead of it, because there's nothing like planning a launch and like pre-selling all these items and then realizing, crap, I will make $0 on this because I just shot too high.
Yeah, it especially impacts your advertising. I think I started to mention, like, if you're ahead of it, then you know what you can spend to, acquire a customer or acquire a purchase of an item. If you don't, then you're shooting blind and, you're kind of just advertising into the wind, and you might see like, oh, look at these return on ad spend numbers. And that's great. ROAS is amazing. Yeah. But, all of a sudden you subtract your cost of goods and you're like, oh, I'm not making any money. So it's really important. Yeah,
definitely.
Well, speaking of knowing your numbers and talking about teams and communicating with your team is kind of the last, probably one of the most important takeaways that I've had running all sorts of different kinds of launches is like keeping an open line of communication throughout the process, making sure that the people who need to be in the loop about everything going on in a launch, all the moving parts, are in the loop, because that's how balls get dropped.
Right.
That's how opportunities get missed when people aren't kept in the loop or aren't aware of what's going on. Communication, I think, is super, super key. And, it comes down to, whether it comes down to emails or making sure that you and the people who are supposed to be at meetings are at meetings. All of that, I think, is really, 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 I can't stress this enough, important. Working in an agency space where a lot of our time is spent communicating with clients and having meetings with them, preparing assets and showing them how it all works and making sure that everybody's clear. I've seen what can happen when everybody is on the same page and how smoothly things can go. And I've seen what can happen when, one or two people are sort of out of the loop or aloof and haven't been paying attention, and how that can throw a massive wrench into what you're doing.
Right.
So
those always end up being the people who end up having huge preferences too. The ones that are like aloof and like not in touch. And then like they'll enter scene like 3 months in and they'll be like, I don't like that. And I'm like, oh, we already made that decision and you were too late. So I'm sorry. But that's what happens, especially, if you are a solo artist, somebody might still be working with you on all of this stuff. I mean, if you are a solo act, like your communication is mostly going to apply to customers, right? But if you're in a band, if you're in a duo, if you have any kind of teammate, right? I mean, I think it's really helpful to get almost like a kind of a flow chart in front of you and be like, all right, what's the progression of this project? Who's involved at each step? And where are the places, if you have a bandmate who is, say they're working on all of the merch stuff and you're working all of the tech and advertising stuff, what is the date where you need to come together? Because it will need to come together. So having some kind of illustration or, at least making sure that everybody knows what those assets look like, how they relate to each other, and what date they need to come together to be a concrete piece of whatever it is that you need to get done. I think that's really important because I see so many bands, they'll have a plan of action, but they don't actually know how their different lanes, kind of come together.
Converge.
Yeah. They don't see how that happens, or they don't see when it happens. And those are two very important things about whatever kind of team you're in.
Yeah, for sure. I think like that applies, like you said, to small teams, whether it's you and one other person working, hand in hand to get something shipped, or whether you're a massive team or something in between, working with a few bandmates. That kind of communication and I would even go so far as to say like deadline setting and meeting setting so that when those silos kind of converge together.
Right.
I think that's mission critical to success because, man, you don't want to get to launch day and all of a sudden be fielding questions and changes and revisions.
Right.
It just makes for a mess. It definitely throws off like the excitement around, a project being launched, which I think it's an important part. Like that momentum, that excitement, I truly think that is part of the kind of secret ingredients that yields success is like everybody working in tandem towards a goal, getting to that point, crossing the finish line together and getting this thing shipped. If at the last minute you're at the finish line and all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, pull the brakes on that ad creative. I don't like that anymore. Even though it was something that got talked about, 3 weeks prior, all of a sudden like you're deflating the morale of the team for one thing. And you're also putting the whole launch at risk because all this, anything can go wrong when you're making changes at the last minute. Right.
Well, and changing things at the last minute can be exhausting, right? So when I have a launch date, I've got that date and then I back plan like, okay, what are the chunks of things that need to be done? And if you know what those silos are and where they converge, and then when you silo back out and converge again, you want a date. You want a goal date for every single one of those. Because if all you have is like, okay, I'm launching on this day, whether an individual or a team, whoever you are, things are gonna get pushed further than are actually humanly possible. So that means that you are then exhausting yourself in the week or 2 weeks prior to that launch, or maybe the day before that launch, depending on how much you've done. And if you do that, you don't have the energy to then follow through, because when something is launched, it's not like, okay, I'm done. Like, you're not done. You got to follow through on all of the promises you made about this launch. You have to keep people engaged beyond that launch and make sure that they weren't just in the hype and then kind of drift away. You got to keep people engaged in it beyond that. Be sharing, if anybody buys this or shares anything about your launch, that you are engaging with those people so that it can continue to have life and you don't have to keep spending on advertising as much as you were, because now you have this organic push. I mean, it takes a lot of energy. So you definitely want to backdate from the launch, but also realize, look, like, for my sanity and for my, energy, I need to know that the momentum carries through that launch, not that it ends at that launch.
Totally. Yeah. That's like almost like the post-marketing period. And that ties into, or I don't even want to call it's not the post-marketing period. It's post-marketing during a launch.
Right.
Post-launch date marketing.
Right.
Which is, super important. And I think like that communication with the team, that kind of communication also definitely extends to the customer,
Right. Exactly.
Keeping that line of communication open with the customers, making sure they're aware of when they're getting things. This kind of ties back to what we were talking about with making sure your fulfillment's taken care of. This communication applies there as well, making sure that the people who are taking care of the customers are doing that job.
Right.
You can't drop the ball at that point.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah. Super, super important.
Yeah, it's a baseball analogy, which is ironic because I don't know anything about sports, but like I think about like golfing or baseball, right? And it's like once you make contact with the ball, that's your album launch. You don't just, it doesn't stop there. Watch Tiger Woods or watch a baseball game and you'll see it follows all the way through. And that's exactly what has to happen with your launch as well. It's not like, oh, we made it, I'm done, Yeah.
That's a great analogy.
So when you're thinking about communication and you're thinking about these deadlines, make sure that you are, starting that momentum early enough where you're not exhausted by the time you get to that launch date.
Totally. That probably sounds exhausting to some people, like, oh my gosh, like so much planning ahead. But I can promise you, like, it will take years off of your life if you don't.
I can vouch for that. The number of things that I've pushed to the last minute, because I am such a great procrastinator. And every time I do it, I'm like, why did I do this to myself? Like, I'm always so mad at myself. And that's just a terrible feeling. I mean, there's, you get that little bit of a high when you have the relief, and then you're like, well, actually, crap, this wasn't done as well as I could have done it, and my follow through is now more of lingering things to fix than it is like, this is a well-oiled machine and I can now concentrate on bringing, because like if you sell something, right, if you do a launch and somebody buys like, if you have, let's say you have 3 tiers of bundles and there's the bottom bundle and the top bundle, and you sell them the bottom bundle, they could still, depending on how well you talk about or share the things that have happened with the top bundle, they could still come back and be like, man, I really wish I would have done that, and end up buying those things. So you always have to keep that in mind. After this launch happens, they didn't just buy and then they're done, right? As long as you keep the momentum going, they might come back and support you even harder, and want to get those things they didn't get. So there's definitely a lot of things to think about when you're planning ahead. It's so worth it. And it's actually way less energy than you'll end up spending trying to catch up after the fact.
Totally. I couldn't say it any better myself.
So, all right. Well, are you done, Jack? 'Cause that's all I got.
That covers the takeaways that I wanted to run down.
Yeah.
I hope that they were insightful and I think there were like 5 or 6 of them. But like I said, we've seen these kind of things pop up, these concepts pop up across all sorts of different types of artists of all fan base sizes and launches from simple to complex. They've kind of been like things that have emerged time and time again. So I'm starting to see them as like, eternal truths of launches.
Yeah.
So I hope that you guys can take them with you into 2021 as you plan out your launches, as you plan to ship products, and really just kind of use these to make a bigger impact than maybe you have previously.
Absolutely. Yeah. And go into the new year just knowing you've got your shit together.
Yeah, totally.
I think
that's a great feeling too.
Yeah, it is. I don't really buy into the new year, new me kind of thing, but I do like resetting the clock on something that I feel like I've been screwing up. So I do that throughout the year where I'm like, okay, I'm going to get this down and then make sure that that's good from now until then. But it does always have kind of a kick when it's, the beginning of the year and you're turning a new page. So
maybe especially this year.
Oh, dude, especially this year.
Yeah.
Expletive 2020. Seriously.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Give us that red E iTunes.
Right, exactly. Oh my gosh. So, but that said, to help indies get into 2021 with even better information, more information, Jack and I are putting ourselves in the hot seat for the next 2 episodes.
It's gonna be fun.
Yeah. So what we would like is for our listeners to go to indiepreneur.io/CJ Hot Seat, all in one word, no dashes or whatever. CJ Hot Seat. We're going to have basically an opportunity for you to submit your questions. I have a feeling that we'll have a lot of questions that have crossover or are the same. So we'll take an assessment of all of those, and the most frequently asked questions, we're going to answer them on the next 2 episodes. So again, that's indiepreneur.io/CJ Hot Seat as one word. And I hope we'll see your questions, because I know that we talk a lot. We have a lot of ideas about what to put on this podcast, but there's nothing better than if you tell us what to put on this podcast. So go there, fill out that form. It's really quick. Obviously doesn't take much time or cost any money. So might as well get it done, right?
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited to be in the hot seat. We haven't done an episode like this before. You and I haven't done an episode like this before. So.
Cirque and I did it, but it was a while back. So I think it's a good way to wrap up this year.
Yeah, what an exciting way to round into December here.
Yeah, definitely. So get those questions in. We'll be back next week to answer all your questions. And yeah, I'm excited for it. So we'll see you next week, Indies on Creative Juice.
Can y'all really feel the East Coast, feel the West Coast?